Brock was the symbol of great base stealing. But today, I'm the greatest of all time. Thank you.
Baseball, what was the passion? I know you were pretty darn good.
You know, it's funny you use that word passion because I believe that to participate in sports, you got to have a passion.
Right.
And the passion is your dream, and most of the time when you have this passion,
He can't play for shit. Might not be the exact words one MLB legend used about Rickey Henderson, but the sentiment was there, loud and clear. When one of baseball's greatest base stealers stood at the podium, after breaking a historic record, he didn't just celebrate. He humiliated the man standing right next to him, and that was just the beginning. 7 baseball legends harbored deep, burning resentment toward Rickey Henderson, and their reasons cut to the very heart of what baseball was supposed to be about. Henderson was talented, sure. He was statistically dominant, but talent doesn't excuse everything, and for these 7 icons, Henderson crossed lines that should never have been crossed. If you're already hooked by this story, give this video some hype because it only gets more revealing from here. Behind every stolen base and every highlight reel moment was a man who made enemies of his own teammates, managers, and the legends who came before him. This is the story of how Rickey Henderson's ego divided the baseball world like few players ever have. Let's start with the man who should have been celebrating alongside Henderson, but instead felt publicly humiliated. Lou Brock was baseball royalty, the king of steals. A dignified speedster who retired with 938 stolen bases and carried himself with the grace expected of a true champion. Brock studied the game. He calculated every move. He represented the old guard, where you let your statistics speak for themselves and treated the game with reverence. When Rickey Henderson approached Brock's all-time stolen base record in 1991, the baseball world expected something special, a passing of the torch, a respectful acknowledgement from the new generation to the old. Instead, what happened on May 1st, 1991 became one of the most uncomfortable moments in baseball history. Henderson needed just 1 stolen base to surpass Brock's record. The stage was set at the Oakland Coliseum. Brock was on the field, standing just feet away from third base, ready to congratulate the new king. But Henderson had other plans. After successfully stealing third base for his 939th career steal, Henderson didn't embrace Brock. He didn't offer a humble wave. Instead, he lifted the base above his head like a trophy of conquest. Then he grabbed the microphone, and standing right next to Lou Brock, the man whose record he just broke, Henderson declared to the world, Lou Brock was the symbol of great base stealing. But today, I am the greatest of all time. The crowd roared.
I'm the greatest of all time. Thank you.
But Brock felt something else entirely. Shock, embarrassment, disrespect. This wasn't just a statement of fact. It was a violation of everything baseball stood for. The night before the game, Brock had approached Henderson privately. He offered to help him write something to say, understanding the magnitude of the moment and the pressure that comes with it. Henderson declined. He wanted to speak from the heart. Brock later revealed what he felt that day, saying Henderson wasn't prepared, and that what shocked him most was how exposed Henderson was while going for a major record. Brock believed you needed someone helping you handle that kind of attention. Henderson chose to go it alone. But the real wound was deeper. Brock explained that when he chased records, most of the guys he was chasing were already gone. He was just chasing paper. Henderson not only came face to face with history, but Brock was there physically, standing right beside him. And Henderson used that moment to make it entirely about himself. The phrase, "I am the greatest of all time," borrowed the swagger of Muhammad Ali, but applied it to a sport that values the team over the individual. Brock felt reduced to a prop in Henderson's coronation. They had eaten dinner together the night before. They even played cards. But that public speech severed their professional bond. Brock represented an era where humility mattered. Henderson represented an era where you spoke louder than your stats ever could. The numbers tell part of the story. Brock finished with 938 stolen bases and a 75.3% success rate. Henderson would eventually retire with 1,406 stolen bases and an 80.8% success rate. He was better. Everyone knew that. But the way Henderson handled the transition left a permanent scar. Brock felt Henderson lacked the grace required of a champion. The disappointment wasn't about losing the record. It was about watching the ritual of baseball history get desecrated by ego. Brock had shown nothing but respect to the legends who came before him. He expected the same. Instead, he got a man who cared more about his own glory than honoring the game's traditions. What made it worse was that Brock had genuinely tried to help Henderson prepare for that moment. He understood the spotlight. He understood the pressure. He knew what it was like to have all eyes on you when history was being made. But Henderson rejected that guidance, and the result was a speech speech that will forever be remembered as one of the most tone-deaf moments in sports. Brock wasn't just disappointed in Henderson's words. He was disappointed that Henderson didn't understand what it meant to be a steward of the game's history. To Brock, you held records and trust for baseball itself. To Henderson, records were personal trophies to be displayed with maximum fanfare. Carlton Fisk saw things differently than Brock, but his hatred for Henderson was just as real. Fisk was a Hall of Fame catcher who embodied the granite-hard, blue-collar work ethic of New England. At 6'3" and 200 pounds, Fisk was an imposing figure who viewed baseball through the lens of suffering and sacrifice. He once said that if the human body recognized agony and frustration, people would never run marathons, have babies, or play baseball. To Fisk, the game was a contest of will. You worked hard, you played hurt, and you never ever drew attention to yourself. Rickey Henderson was the complete opposite of everything Fisk believed in. Fisk despised Henderson's snap catch, a flashy maneuver where Henderson would catch a fly ball in the outfield and violently snap his glove downward, often tapping his thigh or posing for effect. To a catcher like Fisk, who spent decades squatting in the dirt, enduring foul tips, and blocking home plate against charging runners, this was unnecessary showboating. It showed up the pitcher, it showed up the batter. It suggested the game was easy, and nothing offended Fisk more than the suggestion that baseball was easy. Henderson's home run trots were equally infuriating. He would take a slow, leisurely stroll around the bases, sometimes drifting wide into the grass to admire his shot. Fisk, who famously waved his own home run fair in the 1975 World Series with frantic energy, viewed home runs as miraculous events to be respected, not personal showcases. Henderson's style was all about delay and ego. It violated the efficiency and humility Fisk prized above all else. Fisk played the game with intensity that bordered on obsession. He caught more than 2,200 games in his career. He played until he was 45 years old. Every single game was a battle, and every single pitch mattered. When he saw Henderson treating routine plays like performances, it felt like a personal insult to everyone who had suffered through the grind of a 162-game season. Fisk believed baseball was about dignity and competition. Henderson's antics stripped away that dignity and replaced it with theater. On August 2nd, 1985, the chaos Henderson created collided directly with Fisk's disciplined order. The Yankees were playing the Chicago White Sox. It was the bottom of the 7th inning, tied 3-3. Bobby Meacham was on second base. Dale Berra was on first. Henderson stepped up to the plate and crushed a drive to deep left center field. The ball was hit so hard and so high that the runners couldn't tell if it would be caught. Meacham retreated to second to tag up, thinking Luis Salazar might catch it. Berra, meanwhile, assumed the ball would drop and ran full speed towards second. When the ball hit the wall, missing a home run by inches, both runners started sprinting. Meacham stumbled. Berra nearly lapped him. Both came barreling around third base toward home plate, separated by only a few feet. Fisk stood at the plate watching this circus unfold. The relay throw came in from shortstop Ozzie Guillen. Meacham tried to slide and knock over the 200-pound Fisk. Fisk sidestepped like a matador and tagged Meacham out. Then he immediately spun around and tagged out Berra, who was right on Meacham's heels. It was an 8-6-2 double play, a rarity, and a total humiliation for the Yankees. While Henderson wasn't the one tagged out, the play symbolized everything Fisk hated about him: the chaos, the lack of fundamentals, the circus atmosphere that seemed to follow Henderson everywhere. After the game, Fisk said he anticipated more of a crush at the plate, but was just fortunate he didn't stand in Meacham's way. For Fisk, Henderson represented the me-first attitude that led to such breakdowns. The runners were distracted by Henderson's power, or perhaps trying too hard to avoid Henderson yelling at them for clogging the bases. Fisk viewed the entire sequence as symptomatic of a league losing its discipline, and Henderson, who framed million-dollar bonus checks instead of cashing them, was the poster child for the wealthy, flashy free agent era. Fisk, who was unceremoniously released by the White Sox via a visit to his hotel room, resented the pampering that stars like Henderson received. The snap catch was just the visible symptom of a deeper disease Fisk believed Henderson had infected baseball with: the prioritization of style over substance. Goose Gossage took Fisk's disgust and amplified it with pure rage. Rich Goose Gossage was one of the most feared relief pitchers in baseball history. He threw fastballs baseballs with violent intent and believed pitchers had the right and the duty to intimidate batters. For Gossage, baseball was combat, and Rickey Henderson was a hot dog, a player who valued style over substance and humiliated opponents through excessive celebration. Gossage's hatred for Henderson was visceral and lasted decades beyond their playing days. Gossage couldn't stand the way Henderson pimped his movements, the intricate adjustments to his uniform, the exaggerated leads off the base, the staring down of pitchers, the slow trots around the bases. In Gossage's era during the 1970s, such behavior was met with a fastball to the ribs. The hot dog label meant Henderson was performing for the crowd rather than competing with integrity. To a pitcher like Gossage, who relied on a menacing presence on the mound, Henderson's antics were a direct challenge. Henderson's signature move, what some called the Rickey Rally, was particularly humiliating. He would walk, steal second, steal third, and score on a sacrifice fly. But he did it with a flair that screamed superiority. He would dust off his pants even when he hadn't slid. He would talk to himself or to the fielders while on base. He turned routine plays into spectacles every single time. Gossage viewed Henderson as the embodiment of everything that was going wrong with baseball. The game was becoming softer. Players were becoming celebrities instead of warriors. The unwritten rules that had governed the sport for generations were being tossed aside in favor of individual expression and entertainment. To Gossage, this wasn't progress, it was degradation. Henderson wasn't just breaking the rules, he was mocking them, showing that you could succeed wildly while ignoring everything the old guard held sacred. Gossage's disdain ran so deep that it extended well past their playing days. He once said he told Henderson that when they met in an old-timers game, he was going to get him. He was going to get a hit off Henderson, stop the game, and retrieve the ball. This wasn't professional rivalry, this was personal hatred. Gossage wanted to humiliate Henderson in return, to invert the dynamic where Henderson had so often embarrassed pitchers. To Gossage, the game was a zero-sum contest of respect. If Henderson was pimping a home run or a steal, he was stealing respect from the pitcher. Gossage represented the brushback era of baseball. He pitched for the Yankees in the late 1970s and early 1980s during a time of turmoil and grit. He viewed Henderson's stylistic flourishes as a softening of the game. Henderson was the beginning of a generation of players who cared more about their brand than the battle. When Gossage left the Yankees for the San Diego Padres in 1984, he hoped to leave the circus behind, but Henderson's influence was league-wide. The fact that Henderson was successful while acting this way only made Gossage angrier. It signaled the death of the intimidation factor that pitchers like Gossage relied upon. When Gossage called Henderson a hot dog, he was mourning the loss of fear in the batter's box. He hated that Henderson could act that way and get away with it because the rules and the culture were shifting to protect hitters and encourage offense. Tony La Russa brought a different kind of hatred to the table. La Russa is widely regarded as one of the most cerebral, intense, and controlling managers in baseball history. A lawyer by trade and a strategist by nature, La Russa viewed a baseball team as a cohesive unit where the sum was greater than the parts. He pioneered the modern use of the bullpen and demanded meticulous preparation from everyone. Rickey Henderson viewed himself as an independent contractor, a company of one. Their conflict during their time together with the Oakland Athletics was a collision between collectivism and extreme individualism. The breaking point came in August 1995. The Oakland Athletics were struggling, and Henderson was unhappy with his contract status. He felt underpaid compared to the market and engaged in a silent protest. La Russa, usually protective of his players, finally snapped after a game where Henderson scratched himself from the lineup. La Russa publicly blasted Henderson, stating that the outfielder had declared himself mentally unavailable for the game. This was damning. Physical injury is understood and respected in professional sports. Mental unavailability due to contract disputes is interpreted as quitting on the team. La Russa's frustration poured out in brutal fashion. He said Henderson put himself in a position where he was embarrassing himself and the team. La Russa believed Henderson had special talent, but he wasn't a great player because baseball is a team game, and you have to be as interested in the team as yourself. That piece was missing with Rickey. Those words cut deep because they came from a manager who had seen Henderson at his best and his worst. The root of La Russa's frustration was Henderson's transparent financial motivation. Henderson was famous for his contract disputes. He once told management, "All I'm asking for is what I want." There's a famous story that perfectly illustrates the disconnect. Henderson received a $1 million signing bonus check. Several months later, the Athletics accounting department called in a panic because their books were off by exactly $1 million. The money hadn't been withdrawn. When they asked Henderson about it, he revealed he had framed the check and hung it on his wall at home instead of cashing it. For a manager like La Russa, who demanded total us against them unity, this behavior was baffling and infuriating. It showed that Henderson viewed the money and the symbol of the money as more important than the practical operation of the team. Henderson would reportedly refuse to spend his per diem money on road trips, saving it in envelopes instead. His eccentric fixation on finances highlighted everything La Russa hated about him. La Russa found Henderson unmanageable because the normal leverage points didn't work. Most players responded to appeals to team glory or fear of benching. Henderson responded only to what Henderson wanted. When Cleveland expressed interest in trading for Henderson in 1995, Henderson became disgruntled not because he loved Oakland, but because he felt out of the loop. While La Russa acknowledged Henderson's ability to rise to the occasion in the big moment better than anybody he'd ever seen, the daily maintenance of Henderson's ego and the constant threat of him checking out mentally drove La Russa to the edge. La Russa hated the uncertainty. With Rickey, you never knew if you were getting the MVP or the guy who was mentally unavailable because of a contract clause. What made the situation unbearable for La Russa was the precedent Henderson set. Other players watched Henderson get away with his behavior. They saw him make his contract disputes public. They saw him put his personal interests above the team, and some of them started thinking they could do the same. La Russa was trying to build a championship culture where everyone sacrificed for the common goal. Henderson was teaching the opposite lesson. Take care of yourself first, and the team will have to deal with it. That corrosive influence was something La Russa could never forgive. Reggie Jackson brought ego into the equation in a whole different way. Reggie Jackson and Rickey Henderson are two of the biggest personalities to ever wear the Oakland A's and New York Yankees uniforms. When their careers intersected, particularly when Henderson arrived in New York in 1985, the result was a high-stakes battle for the spotlight. Jackson, known as Mr. October, thrived on being the straw that stirs the drink. Henderson, who referred to himself in the third person constantly, was equally convinced of his own centrality to the baseball universe. The friction between Jackson and Henderson was a battle for alpha status. Jackson had established himself as the premier attraction in New York during the late 1970s. He famously feuded with Thurman Munson and Billy Martin to assert his dominance. He believed he was the engine of the team. When Henderson arrived in New York, he brought a similar level of self-assurance and a playing style that demanded attention. Two massive egos in one clubhouse created inevitable conflict. Jackson viewed himself as the mentor and the elder statesman. He expected deference. Henderson, however, did not do deference. There's a telling story about Henderson asking Jackson to sign a ball for his mother, but then forcing Jackson to sign it alongside him, establishing them as equals rather than fan and idol. Jackson would ignore people he felt were beneath him, while Henderson would sometimes be more accessible. This created tension that neither man could resolve. A tangible artifact of their rivalry is a check written by Reggie Jackson to Rickey Henderson for $1,000 in 1991. The check sold for over $14,000 at auction years later. The memo line on the check read All-Star Ticks, implying Jackson was reimbursing Henderson for tickets to the All-Star game, but both men were all-stars with ample access to tickets. The prevailing theory is that it was a gambling debt. On the back of the check, above his signature, Henderson wrote, "I am the best card player." This seemingly trivial detail reveals the pettiness of their rivalry. They competed at everything: baseball, salary, cards. The fact that Henderson felt the need to write, "I am the best" on the financial instrument of his victory was a final twist of the knife. Jackson hated losing, especially to the younger, brash Henderson. Their hatred was a sibling rivalry writ large. Two massive egos in a room too small to contain them both. Neither man could stand being in the other's shadow, and their conflict poisoned the clubhouse atmosphere wherever they crossed paths. The rivalry extended beyond just personal slights. Both men craved the attention of the media. Both wanted to be quoted. Both wanted their faces on magazine covers. When Henderson started getting that attention in New York, it cut into Jackson's territory. Jackson had been the undisputed star, the guy everyone wanted to talk to. Suddenly, there was competition, and Jackson, who had fought fought so hard to establish his brand as Mr. October, wasn't about to share the stage without a fight. The result was a cold war in the clubhouse that made everyone around them uncomfortable. Bobby Valentine experienced Henderson's selfishness in perhaps the most shocking way of all. Valentine, manager of the New York Mets in 1999, was known for his intense, often frantic management style. He was a micromanager who wore his emotions on his sleeve. The 1999 National League Championship Series against the Atlanta Braves was a high-pressure crucible. The Mets were underdogs, scrapping for every inch. In Game 6, an elimination game that went into extra innings, Valentine found his authority directly challenged by Rickey Henderson in one of the most surreal acts of insubordination in playoff history. The date was October 19, 1999. The Mets were fighting for their playoff lives in Game 6. The game was a seesaw battle that eventually went into extra innings. Henderson had been removed from the game in the late innings as part of a double switch or defensive replacement. Instead of staying in the dugout to cheer on his teammates during the most critical innings of the season, Henderson, along with teammate Bobby Bonilla, retired to the clubhouse. Reports surfaced later that the two were found playing cards while the game was still in progress. This wasn't a pre-game ritual. This occurred during the 10th and 11th innings of an elimination game. Valentine was reportedly livid. The act was a show of defiance. Henderson was angry that Valentine had replaced him with Melvin Mora in the 8th inning of Game 4 and was protesting his lack of playing time by checking out of the game entirely. For a manager like Valentine, there is no greater sin than a player abandoning his teammates during battle. The optics were devastating. While teammates were crying and screaming in the dugout after the heartbreaking loss, when the Mets lost on a walk-off walk by Kenny Rogers to Andrew Jones, they walked into the clubhouse to see their veteran leaders playing cards. One source affiliated with the team noted that players wanted to take a bat to their heads. Valentine viewed this as a personal betrayal and a professional disgrace. It confirmed every negative stereotype about Henderson, that he was a mercenary who cared only about his own stats and playing time, that he possessed zero emotional investment in the team's collective fate if he wasn't the star of the moment. The incident effectively ended Henderson's tenure as a serious impact player in New York. Valentine, who prided himself on extracting maximum effort, could not forgive the apathy. The hatred Valentine felt was that of a general whose soldier deserted his post in the heat of battle to play a game of chance. What made the incident even more infuriating was the timing. This wasn't a regular season game in July. This was the postseason. This was everything baseball players supposedly dream about. The chance to win a championship. The chance to be a hero. And Henderson couldn't even be bothered to stay in the dugout to support his teammates because he was upset about playing time in a previous game. It showed a stunning lack of perspective and priorities. Valentine never forgot it, and neither did the players who were crying their eyes out while Henderson shuffled cards. Orlando El Duque Hernandez experienced Henderson's cruelty in a more personal way. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Henderson was a baseball elder, having played in 4 different decades. He used his longevity as a weapon to belittle opponents. Orlando Hernandez, known as El Duque, had a vastly different path to the majors. A star in Cuba, he defected to the United States on a small boat, risking his life to pitch in the major leagues. He was a rookie in 1998 at age 32, bringing a wealth of life experience and a unique high-leg kick pitching style. During a dispute on the field, likely involving a hit-by-pitch or a brushback pitch, Rickey turned to El Duque and delivered a withering insult. He said, "When I broke into the game, you were crawling on your hands and knees." This comment was viewed by many peers as deeply offensive, arrogant, and factually dismissive. It infantilized El Duque. Henderson was asserting that he was a grown man playing Major League Baseball while El Duque was a toddler. But the facts didn't even support the insult. El Duque was born around 1965, meaning he was a teenager in Cuba during Henderson's rookie year in 1979, hardly crawling. But the accuracy mattered less than the intent. Henderson wanted to humiliate. The comment also showed cultural insensitivity, dismissing the struggle of the Cuban defector who had overcome immense geopolitical barriers to stand on that mound, showed a lack of respect for El Duque's journey. Henderson often used his tenure to silence critics or demand privileges. He famously told Steve Finley, who offered him a seat on the bus due to tenure, that Rickey had been playing at least 16 or 17 years. But the comment to El Duque was malicious. It wasn't about a seat on the bus. It was about status on the diamond. For El Duque, a proud competitor who pitched with high emotion, Henderson's comment was a violation of peer respect. It exemplified why so many contemporaries struggled to like Henderson despite his talent. He refused to view them as equals. To Henderson, everyone else was a guest in his league. The hatred here was personal, born of Henderson's need to belittle others to maintain his own sense of superiority as his skills declined in his twilight years. El Duque had risked everything to play baseball in America. He left his family behind. He escaped on a boat, not knowing if he would survive the journey. He had to prove himself all over again in a new country, in a new league, at an age when most players are established veterans. And Henderson dismissed all of that struggle with one condescending line. It wasn't just arrogant, it was cruel. It showed that Henderson saw other players not as fellow competitors, but as obstacles to his own glory. When you look at these 7 stories together, a pattern emerges. Lou Brock felt publicly humiliated when Henderson turned a record-breaking moment into a selfish coronation. Carlton Fisk was disgusted by Henderson's flashy style that violated baseball's work ethic. Goose Gossage raged against Henderson's hot dog antics that destroyed the fear factor pitchers relied on. Tony La Russa was exhausted by Henderson's individualism and contract obsessions that put himself above the team. Reggie Jackson clashed with Henderson in a battle of egos that poisoned clubhouses. Bobby Valentine was furious when Henderson played cards during an elimination game instead of supporting his teammates. And Orlando El Duque was insulted by Henderson's condescending dismissal of his entire career and journey. Each conflict reveals a different facet of the same truth. Rickey Henderson was baseball's mirror, forcing others to confront the sport's evolution from the we of the mid-century to the me of the modern era. Henderson didn't just steal bases. He stole the peace of mind of the establishment. He represented a shift toward individualism, personal branding, and transparent financial motivation that the old guard found repulsive. To them, he made a mockery of the game they worshipped. The common thread running through all these conflicts is respect. Henderson demanded respect for his talent, but refused to show respect for the traditions, hierarchies, and unwritten rules that governed baseball. He wanted to be recognized as the greatest, but wouldn't acknowledge the contributions of those who came before him or stand beside him. He expected special treatment, but wouldn't make sacrifices for the team. This created a fundamental disconnect between Henderson and the baseball establishment that could never be bridged. But here's the thing, Henderson changed baseball forever. He didn't just break records, he redefined what it meant to be a leadoff hitter. He brought electricity to the game, he made fans stand up and pay attention. Yes, he was hated by legends who couldn't reconcile his style with their values. Yes, he alienated peers with his ego and his antics. But he also inspired a generation of players who realized they didn't have to follow the old rules anymore. Henderson proved you could be great on your own terms. The hatred these 7 legends felt toward Rickey Henderson wasn't really about him. It was about what he represented, the end of an era, the death of humility as a virtue, the rise of the athlete as a brand. Henderson was the bridge between the stoic icons of the past and the superstars of the present. Bridges get walked on, they get criticized, they get resented, but they also connect 2 worlds that otherwise would never meet. Rickey Henderson was undeniably one of the greatest players to ever step on a baseball diamond. He holds records that may never be broken. He brought a style and swagger to the game that captivated millions. And yes, he made enemies along the way, lots of them. But in the end, he made sure every single one of them remembered his name. That's the mark of greatness, even if it comes with a cost. He might have been hated by the legends, but he earned his place among them, and that's something nobody can ever take away.
the greatest of all time. Thank you.